Okay, Brett, I've been really fascinated by your background for a couple reasons. So I'm living in North Idaho, outside of Coeur d'Alene right now. My fiance's cousin went to school in Helena, Montana. I was just in Glacier National Park. I saw you went to Montana State, and so I had to ask the question just to get more familiar with you and your story. So you went to school at Montana State. I'm super fascinated by Tom's, Balding's, Bits and Spurs, and then now here you are working for Sequoia in tech, like in the world of technology and helping build these executive teams. What's the story there? Like, what was the arc to go from Montana State, Tom's, Balding's, Bits and Spurs into the world of recruiting?
Well, that's a long story. I grew up in Wyoming and my neighbor was Tom Balding. So at 12, being in the middle of nowhere, it seemed as good as any job I was likely to find, and honestly, just something to do. So I started off by mowing his field, and I think I made $6 to mow the entire thing. Eventually graduated to building metal parts with grinders, saws, torches, hammers, and all the usual stuff you'd expect. Tom, he was this really interesting person. He came from the aerospace industry and always spent a bunch of time building jigs to make all those parts better, faster, and cheaper. And I suppose I've taken a little bit of that mentality for automation and scale to every job I've had since. And so you always hear about people building the best. And it really wasn't until years later that I saw a catalog with a bunch of prices listed, and his bits were twice the price of anything else. And so I think it is safe to say, like, he really does build the best.
Man, so how does that then translate to then getting into a place like Mozilla, and then I know there's a couple steps in between Mozilla and then now Sequoia, but what was the leap like?
I was good at math and science. Engineering seemed like the right next step. You go to the list of engineering jobs, and at the time, chemical engineering was at the top of the salary sheet. So chemical engineering was. And I'm sure that today, top of that list says computer science. And so even though I didn't become a chemical engineer, it's still always been super helpful in going through those classes, seeing how the top students performed and thought about engineering versus how a solidly mediocre person like myself thought about those problems. And so when I speak with engineers and hear echoes of those two best students, I know that's somebody to pay attention to. And when I hear people that sound more like myself, maybe that's time for a little more vetting.
Wow, that's such a cool story. To think about this. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I was hoping we could start off with just a quick introduction, just to share a little bit about your perspective on hiring. So the purpose of our session here is, hiring. The landscape of hiring has changed this past year, so we face a lot of new hurdles. And so what's really exciting is to get your perspective and from of the different cross-cutting things that you see from the industry. And so I was wondering, first off, can you share your name and what you do, and maybe summarize the unique perspective that you have on hiring in tech right now?
I'm Bret Reckard, and I've been at Sequoia now for a little over 9 years, leading our early stage talent team. Each year, our team works with over 40 seed and Series A founders to build out their core EPD orgs. And my perspective at the moment is that even with the rise of remote work, flattening of the earth this past year, that the market has just never been tighter. And I'm excited to be here to discuss what we're seeing out in the wild.
What would be your thesis right now on the state of hiring and recruiting? If you could give it a headline of what you see going on right now, what would that headline be?
My thesis is that we're in for incredibly tight next 2 years and probably longer in the talent market. And my headline is iterate or fail. So why so tight? I think venture investing dollars are up 94% year over year. We have a large number of IPOs and exits last year. We have sort of another similar level this year. Unicorn counts are up over 1,000 globally, and public company valuations are way up. So at one end of the market, you have people who maybe are interested in those early stage opportunities that are trapped in golden handcuffs. And on the other end, you have companies that are forming, receiving a bunch of venture dollars and hungry for talent. And the market is just super stretched. And so the simple fact is funding might be up, but the talent pool just hasn't grown by that same 94%. And so to succeed, in my opinion, leaders really need to be more aggressive and really dissect their process, think about everything from a candidate's point of view, and strip out anything that isn't going to help a candidate either say yes at the end of your process or get to the end of your process. And because candidates are going to be sort of moving through this process really fast, on your side, you need to be confident and prepared that you're evaluating core components, that you're removing as much bias and nice to haves from your process as possible, and that you're just being very intentional about every step. And and really thinking closely about hurdles like coding challenges and take-home tests, and how any hurdle you're putting into your process is either helping you or pushing people away from your company.
You mentioned, people need to take a look at different stages of their hiring process and reducing friction. So let's start with sourcing. When you look specifically at sourcing candidates, from your perspective, what are the current challenges with sourcing candidates within the industry, and some of the problems that you're seeing people face right now?
One trend is that talent pool is shrinking, and another trend is using automation to approve all of the outbound conversions. So companies are using tools like Gem and Covey to automate a bunch of their outbound numbers. And companies like small startups, midsize, everybody's using them. And frankly, the candidate pool is just getting inundated with emails, and across the board, we're seeing lower response rates. And so with the industry pushing increasingly higher volumes of email, like they really need to be thinking about how to spend time building up the branding pieces to make those messages stick. So that means spending time on things like tech blogs, publishing your funding announcements, making sure that your employees update their LinkedIn bios to show that they actually work at your company, and honestly, just being really creative about your outreach. One company we work with, Loom.com, when they were hiring for their head of design, the CEO sat down and recorded 200 personalized sort of 10, 15-second clips of him pitching a candidate of why they should be at Loom and why he was specifically interested in having a conversation with them. And yes, that kind of creativity sounds excessive, but I really expect that sort of commitment to hiring and commitment to personalization is going to be the norm over the next, well, maybe forever. And so just keep in mind that high volume works for large companies because they have the brand and they've made those investments. But be careful if you're a smaller company to mimic just those pure high volume tactics, because you need to invest in brand and you need to invest in personalization to make those same things work.
What should people be paying attention to? So given some of the challenges that you laid out, what's working? And maybe if there was like a number one tactic that's made the biggest difference here that you've seen worked or applied yourself, could you reveal your secret with what that tactic is?
I think the number one tactic is making the process extremely personal. With the rise of remote work, it's easy for candidates to take the afternoon off, interview at your company, a morning off, interview at some other company, and then do the same thing tomorrow and the next day, or just do it once a week, because why not keep yourself open to opportunity? And because it's easier to interview, candidates are taking a lot more conversations with way more companies than they ever have before. That can hurt you, but it could also help you in a lot of ways. I think first, being personal helps you convert one of those tire kicking interviews into a real process and converting somebody to actually a hire. And I think the second way it helps you is the more personal you are, the more candidates going to share with you. They'll tell you about what they're looking for, how active they are in the interview process, like what actually matters for them. And it allows you to understand like the bucket of things a candidate wants versus what your company has to offer, and if that's bridgeable or not.
So from your perspective, what's next? Like, how is the world of sourcing going to evolve or change? What are some of the trends that you're interested in? Or what's your prediction on what do you think will happen?
I think people are going to have to invest a lot more in hiring either people that don't have the exact skills fit or technical fit for roles that they're looking to fill, or perhaps even hiring from hacker schools or from industries outside of traditional, at least like neckbeard unicorn startup land, and be able to bring in people that have strong fundamentals, who have an interest in entering this new world of technology, and the time's right for them because there's scarcity of talent. A lot of these people are located in places where they can't move easily and don't want to be in Silicon Valley. So remote world makes it easier to hire somebody who's been doing insurance claims processing in the middle of Nebraska for the last 5 years. And maybe that person's there because their family's there and they don't want to move. And I think people are going to have to be a lot more open to non-traditional, air quote, backgrounds for the people that they're going to bring on board, with the expectation that people are actually going to have to learn new skills. They're going to be coached up, and expecting people to have 5 years of React experience or whatever it is still something you can do, but I think isn't going to necessarily be as easy as it's been in the past.
Let's talk about interviewing next. So from your perspective, what are some of the current challenges you're seeing related to interviewing? What are some of the problems that people are having right now?
I think, one, they're spending a lot of time talking to people that have no intention whatsoever of actually accepting an eventual job offer. And so the company is investing 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours interviewing people that if they would have spent an extra 5 or 10 minutes in your first phone call, like really understanding what were the key drivers for that person to make a choice, you would quickly find out that your 5-person company isn't going to financially satisfy what this person needs to make a living. And it could be financial, could be this person is 100% mission driven and only wants to work on problems that are curing an infectious disease or making the world like objectively a better place. And if you aren't doing that thing, then you, like with the amount of companies that are hiring, like the person's going to find somebody or find a company that's doing the thing that they want to do if they care that much about that one specific thing. And sometimes usually if you're a very early stage company, you don't run into somebody that's purely make a financial decision. But if the goal is to be a financially driven hire, and they're talking to you and they're talking to late stage unicorn companies, probably going to have a hard time making that person excited in the end when it comes to real tangible dollars that are going to show up in their bank account versus building with a small team and just all the things that an early stage company has to offer. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but you should be realistic about all of these things at the front end and not necessarily think you are going to be the special one, or else you will invest a bunch of time where it isn't going to serve you well.
So you mentioned spending time vetting people at the beginning. What have you seen work tactically given this challenge? What's something that's made the biggest difference here for you or that you've seen work?
I think the things that have made the biggest difference are honestly just 2 5-minute windows. I think the first 5-minute window is when you open up a role that you go through the trouble of actually talking with your team about the role, about the profile, about making sure everybody just agrees that the position's needed, everybody agrees what they're going to interview for, and just finding that alignment on your own team saves you a bunch of time down the road. I think the second is to just really make a habit out of taking 5 minutes with every candidate to ask them about how they're thinking about their search, about what matters to them in their next role, and what types of companies they're looking at. And you'll find that if things are aligning and you both agree that yes, your company is the right fit, then you can take those little nuggets and pass them on to the next interviewer and build excitement and build interest in your opportunity over time. And honestly, if it doesn't seem like the right match, maybe your salary bands are way off and the person just couldn't honestly live on the amount that you're willing to pay, being honest about it and cutting the process off early can save countless hours later on in the process. And frankly, all those personalized touches and all that knowledge is going to just make the close at the very end all that much easier because you can really cater it to the specific person.
So now when you look forward, Bret, what's next related to the world of interviewing? How do you see the world of interviewing evolving or changing? What's your prediction here?
I think the biggest prediction is that companies are just going to be expected to spend more time training people. And because of that, I think during the interview, companies are going to have to be more flexible about what a good candidate looks like. And I think the world moving remote has taught everybody that you don't have to fear remote teams being effective. The problem is ramping people is just always going to be a challenge. And I think it's companies that build strong, formal training programs and on-ramp programs, something maybe akin to Facebook's bootcamp, are going to be those companies that are most successful across the industry, because those are the companies that can draw from the largest talent base. And I think overall, we've learned a person is going to be motivated, successful, and want to go their career, and they'll overcome most obstacles in their way. I think it's really on us as an industry and as leaders to make it easy for more people to perform and more people to get into this industry and into great companies like the ones you all work with.
So I want to make sure we have time to dig into one more topic, Bret, around compensation. So talk about the closing process and compensation. From your perspective, what are some of the current, you sort of noted this at the beginning a little bit, but what are some of the current compensation challenges in the industry? What are some of the problems that you're seeing people have right now?
The initial push to remote work had companies thinking they could really escape high salaries of tech hubs. But in a recent survey we pushed out to our portfolio about back to work, about 50% of the startups have no plans of adjusting compensation based on location, because in their thought, hiring great people costs what it costs. And so they don't plan on geo adjustments. And I really think that that's going to be a trend over long term, where there's a national salary band for people in the tech industry, certainly true for more senior people. And it's just a fact that COVID's increased the number of options available to people who are in far-flung places. And with more options, naturally, the price is going to increase. And so I think the top thing to keep in mind is really, as a company, your competition is no longer Mountain View, San Francisco, could be across the globe, could be anywhere, and people are findable. So making sure that compensation at your company tracks these national and international trends, especially for top people, is going to be key.
What's sort of the number one tactic that you've seen make the biggest difference here?
I think the tactic that's going to make the biggest difference for most companies is adjusting comp and honestly tracking changing of comp very closely. The opportunity cost of missing a hire is huge. And if you can take one of those common reasons why offers are generally declined off the table, I just don't know why you wouldn't do it. And so the logic would be, great people are going to do more to help you as a company win than an extra 10 or 40 grand or 50 grand, or maybe even a lot more than that in your company's bank account. And so if that money isn't there helping you build a great product through hiring great people, I don't know what it's there for. And so use the fact that 80% of a company's P&L goes to paying salaries, and use the fact that those venture dollars are really around to help you employ people, build a great product, and grow.
So what's next? How is this going to evolve or change? What are the trends that you're interested in? What's your prediction here with compensation?
As I mentioned before, I think there's going to be more of a national market for what an engineer happens to get paid. I could also foresee a world where tech hubs are still very important, but they're treated almost like a postdoc, where smart student graduates, they migrate to a tech hub for 3 to 5 years to get that stamp of Silicon Valley approved or tier 1 tech company approved on the resume. After that, really being free to relocate, go international, work from a van with a Starlink satellite sitting on the top of it. I think it's just going to be very different, and certainly different for early career people. And I expect that to spill out throughout people's careers, and just to be a much more fluid environment for people to work in the future.
The Starlink van satellite image you portrayed is essentially my dream. So I'm all in on that type of world, and making the back corner of the van a podcast studio. So sign me up for however we make that a reality, but also understanding the giant market implications that has is pretty staggering. So final question, Bret, to bring this all together. So we talked about sourcing, we talked about interviewing and compensation. Is there one piece of advice or an insight that you would share, or a perspective that you would like to lend to engineering leaders around the world of hiring or recruiting?
I think the one last insight is that you are in control. Like, you are a leader, it's your team, it's your company. You have resources, you can always lobby for more. And success and successful hiring means, like, it has to be a team effort. Like, you pushing from the top, your recruiting team pushing from the bottom, and you really driving that thought around removing friction, moving faster, making it easier for people on your team to recommend people that are good, and making sure that everybody has a chance to contribute to the process is just super important. And yes, like it's a hard market, but I think you as a leader are the person who needs to be responsible for making the environment where people are going to be spending 8 to 10 hours of their life every single day. And frankly, that's one of the main topics we try to get through to every founder that we work with. You may have just raised $10 million or whatever, but in a lot of ways, raising $10 million from an investor is different. And I might even say easier than having somebody give 3 or 4 years of their working life to your company. And so you really have to think heavily about what are you offering? What are you asking people to give up? Like, what's the environment you're creating? And how are you going to help people be successful? And all that time you put into that thinking and creating that team, that org for yourself is going to make a tremendous difference for hiring. And so I think there's a lot of challenges, but the key message is all those things are in your control, and it's on you to do it. So you have the power, go forth and hire.